This episode is brought to you by Bumble. So, you want to find someone you're compatible with, specifically someone who's ready for a serious connection, totally open to having kids in the future, is a tall, rock-climbing Libra, and loves rom-coms with vegan pizzas on Tuesdays just as much as you do. Bumble knows that you know exactly what's right for you. So whatever it is you're looking for, Bumble's features can help you find it. Date now on Bumble.
Hello and welcome to Outward, Slate's podcast for the he's and hems, the she's and hers, the theys and thems, and today especially the these and thys. I'm Brian Louder, editor at Slate, and after a few weeks being solo at the helm of our little queer ship, I'm delighted today to not have just one but two friends with me on the bridge. Of course, as always, there's my best mate, Jules Gill-Peterson. Hello, Jules. How are you?
Hello. Good morrow to thee. I'm very well and merry, thank you.
Hail and well met. And perhaps even more exciting, we have on the show today our former producer and outward progenitor, June Thomas. Hello, June.
Good morrow, y'all.
Now that was showing some range.
That was range, yeah.
Travel right across the Atlantic there.
I do need to add something to that list, to the producer and to the outward progenitor, because June, as our listeners may know or should know, is the author of a brilliant new book that's about to come out in May called A Place of Our Own, 6 Spaces That Shaped Queer Women's Culture. And like I said, to come out in May. We are going to have a whole episode to talk about that. But for the moment, June, I just wanted to ask, how are you feeling about the book imminently entering?
Every author's favorite question.
Yeah.
I am both excited because I have had reviews that mention things that I wanted to be noticed kind of thing.
Oh, good.
But also terrified because I haven't yet had one of those interviews with a stranger that I am terrified about. But, it also feels like I'm about 23 months pregnant. So I'm just ready for it to be out there.
Get it out. Yeah. Get it out.
That was a very good metaphor. Been there.
Well, yeah, we are excited for it to be out too. And like I said, we will definitely have a show dedicated to discussing that later in the spring. This week, we are turning our attention to less serious, but maybe no less enjoyable matters, namely the soapy, sexy, very queer series, Mary and George. This is the show set in King James's the First's court, or mostly really his bedchamber, I should say, where he was fond of doting on nubile young men, which naturally stirs up a lot of palace intrigue and national intrigue and all kinds of intrigue. It also has Julianne Moore as a conniving lesbian 17th century helicopter parent. It is, in my opinion, exactly the silly political trifle I needed during a period of quite grim politics in the real world, but we will find out if it pleased my co-hosts anon. Along with that, we'll have your monthly updates to the gay agenda and our usual round of prides and provocations. And don't worry, we've been collecting your queries for an upcoming advice show. There's some really good ones that have come in recently. Please keep sending those questions to outwardpodcast@slate.com.
Well, I think it is time for some prides and provocations. So glad it's a trio this month. So we'll see which way the number splits, which feeling will reign supreme. June, since you're our wonderful guest, what do you got for us? How are you feeling? Proud, provoked, a little bit of both?
I'm sorry to say, for the sake of the mathematics, that I'm a little bit of both. I am mostly and very badly provoked by the way that British MPs are behaving right now. We're at the kind of the rump end of a parliament, and the end is in sight, and a lot of MPs are showing their rumps, showing their ends. They are behaving very badly. Currently, there are 18 members of parliament who have had the whip suspended. And I got to tell you, that is not as much fun as it sounds. It means their parties have said to them that you are no longer welcome to sit with us, literally. You're no longer welcome to, identify as a member of this party in parliament.
Okay.
And there are 18. They would be the fourth biggest party if they weren't just shady clowns.
Holy shit.
The shady clown party.
Yeah. And there are also, I believe, 20 others who were suspended, had the whip suspended, and have quit or lost or otherwise disappeared. I don't agree with all the suspensions. Free Diane Abbott. I want to go on record with that. But some involve really serious accusations. One gay Tory was arrested on suspicion of rape. There are also several sexual harassment, historical sex offenses, domestic violence. So some are very serious. And then one guy was suspended because he was caught watching what has been referred to as tractor porn in the House of Commons. Actually, in the chamber.
This is gay tractor porn?
I actually don't know, but
Unclear.
Unclear because
how
I've
can
been
that
afraid
not be gay? I'm sorry.
Well, except to me, it's like, how can it not be straight? But I've been afraid to Google it, honestly.
I know. I'm not doing that.
Yeah. So there, and some of them have been gay. There was a guy recently who was openly gay. He wasn't closeted or anything, but he gave out lots of MPs' phone numbers to a guy on Grindr with whom he was DMing, who had something on him. What? There was a guy today who called a 76-year-old former campaign volunteer and asked her to send him £5,000 because he was locked in a room and it could be a matter of life or death. I mean, these are sitting MPs. They're just genuinely on the edge of clowning themselves and clowning the country, but also some of it is just awful. So I guess in that sense, I'm provoked by their awful behavior. There's also a little bit of me that's like, well, just in case we needed reminding, again, George Santos, that gays can be just as bad as the straights. I'm kind of there. And there we go.
Wow. I mean, I want to say I'm already loving this episode for bringing us just kind of a little vocabulary that I personally love. Again, as a Canadian, Bryan, you said nubile earlier.
Yes.
Right. And we got rump parliament, one of my absolute favorite phrases as someone who had to learn the Westminster system growing up. So that alone was worth it. But yeah, gay Tory, hello. The word Tory is just a good sign. You're not a good person.
Yeah. And don't put anything on Grindr, especially.
Yeah, I know. Just
phone numbers.
2024
It's all
basic
being
rules.
scanned. It's all being scanned. Don't do it.
Bryan, are you proud or provoked?
I am proud this month, and it's going to sound a little, what's another great word I can use? A little jejune at first.
Oh my God, stop.
Because I'm proud of a pride flag, right? And that sounds kind of boring, but let me explain. So listeners may know, real ones will know, that I am from South Carolina originally, which parts of which I love, but of course is a very conservative place. The New York Times just ran a really chilling piece about a real estate company that is specifically designed to help conservatives flee blue states and move to red states. And they've decided specifically that South Carolina is the ideal state for them to move to because of taxes and whatever, all kinds of things. So it's only getting more conservative. This made me upset because I still have family there who are not conservative, and it sucks that the state is continuing that progression. So this brings me to my grandma's house in South Carolina. She lives in a little cove. Across that cove are numerous giant Trump flags, flying in people's yards. I'm talking 5 to 6. It's a lot. One, including the rarely spotted Women for Trump flag. I'm not sure if a woman actually put it there, if just the guy decided to put it there, but it's there. It ruins the view. Every time I visit, it reminds you who you're dealing with, what the sort of political culture is largely in this area. And if you didn't notice the flags, this guy plays Fox News so loudly that it echoes across the water, so you can hear that. So I heard through the grapevine, though, the grapevine being my mom, that 2 women who we presume to be a lesbian couple, because they paddle around in a canoe together in the cove, recently bought a house. And she told me just today that they put up a huge pride flag in their yard. So they are flag dueling with the Trump flags. I have done this, and we all have done this, I think, discounted the power of the rainbow flag as a symbol, whatever. It's been corporatized, all of that. But in this case, it touched me. I think it's pretty brave. It's a powerful statement in this context, right? And so even though I don't know these ladies, I am proud of them for showing their pride, definitely in an unfriendly place. And, just letting everyone know that they live there too, right? It's not only the Trump guy. So proud of them and good use of the flag.
Yeah.
Jules, what do you have?
Well, I have a provocation. I hope it's not so annoying, but because what am I going to be provoked by? Oh, I don't know, a Supreme Court order. Yeah, it's very, very Jules. But I guess I kind of wanted to tie into the really wonderful episodes we had with Chase Strangio not too long ago, kind of breaking down, what's going on legally around medical transition, around basic shit that concerns trans people. And I was sort of provoked, obviously, by what happened. There's been a legal case coming out of Idaho after it passed, a gender-affirming care ban, where there's been a request for an emergency taking up of this issue at the Supreme Court because there's disagreement, at the federal district court level. And, as Chase very rightly pointed out, after this order came down, SCOTUS just kind of sat on that for months. And then basically what happened was issued this order that said, no, you can't actually suspend or, you can't have a total injunction against this law. It's fine to let most of it go into effect for now while we figure out what happens in this lower level court case. And so that pisses me off for lots of reasons. But what I'm actually really provoked by is just, again, it's the same thing that Chase was provoked by. I just kind of wanted to be a mouthpiece for what I think he's rightly drawing our attention to, just how horrendously bad journalistic coverage has become. And I don't just mean, although I think Chase did a really great breakdown of this on his Instagram Reels, like how the New York Times covered, it was just like, a controversial case is happening. And it's like, no, that's not how these things happen. Like, there's a lot more going on. Didn't talk about the real harm now for kids who are going to be forcibly detransitioned in the state of Idaho, people who have to figure out whether they can flee if they, or what they're going to do. But actually just that, like, journalists aren't really doing basic context or facts, as we famously know about trans issues. But that kind of led to a number of problems, I think. And like, one of them is that obviously procedural orders at the Supreme Court are annoying and opaque and hard to understand. And that's like partly because that they're designed to do that. They can cause great trouble in ways that are very difficult to understand if you don't have a law degree. And so we actually do rely on journalists to, check their facts, go to expert sources and be able to distill and translate what is going on. And I've seen repeatedly around Supreme Court decisions of all kinds lately, but especially around like any legal matter involving like queer and trans people, just a lot of fear-mongering that actually articles are promoting in their headlines, in their sort of leads, where it makes it seem like something really drastic has happened that actually has not happened. And so like with this order, a lot of people are like, oh my God, the Supreme Court clearly is going to agree that we can ban medical transition for all kids, or is going to ban medical transition for everyone. Like nothing like that happened, right? It might, but like it kind of matters to know whether it already happened or will happen in the future, in which case we could stop it from happening, right? Or it may not happen, or something that kind of looks like that, but isn't that will happen. Like these things really matter. I'm not just saying that because I'm an annoying bitch with a PhD. Like I really think it matters politically. And so I'm just feeling provoked. It's like this latest wave of bad journalism now is like when really bad things are happening to trans people. If like papers of record can't even explain what those things are, that is actually like being complicit with the harm. And it is actually like, in my mind, politically dispiriting. It is trying to deactivate people, confuse people, make them feel helpless, and ultimately make us feel like we're just watching a slow motion car wreck, which is absolutely not what's happening. So that's all. I'm just kind of feeling prickly, but I think like something for us all to keep in mind when we're unfortunately, really trying to zhuzh up our media literacy skills. People are not reporting on SCOTUS properly.
I completely agree that it has a material and like emotional effect when it's miscommunicated, right? I mean, that's what you're saying. Like it, to be frightened or bummed out or whatever, however you want to describe it, hurts like the movement to fight back against it. And that is a dereliction of journalistic duty for sure. It's a shame to see that. I'm glad that you brought that up.
Well, while we're all getting our facts straight, let's take a little break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about all the glitz, glamour, and naughty behavior in the court of King James.
If you're struggling to lose weight, you've probably heard about weight loss medications like Wegovy or Zepbound, and you might be wondering if they're right for you. Meet PlushCare, a leading telehealth provider with doctors who are there for you day and night to partner with you in your weight loss journey. If you qualify, they can safely prescribe you medication from the comfort of your own home. To get started, visit plushcare.com/weight-loss. That's plushcare.com/weight-loss. PlushCare.com/weight loss.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
On Death, Sex, and Money, we feature interviews with you, our community of listeners, getting honest about uncomfortable things.
I developed an illness where it isn't safe for me to drive. A friend once said to me, sex is like air. You don't think about it until you're not getting enough. This is a similar sort of thing if you just replace sex with driving.
Listen to Death, Sex, and Money wherever you get podcasts.
All right, we are back. Mary and George is the new Starz series from showrunner DC Moore that dramatizes the true story of Mary Villiers, played by Julianne Moore, and her apparently quite handsome son, George, played by Nicholas Galitzine, as they attempt to worm their way up from being minor gentry into the court of King James I and VI. There's 2 numbers there, as June reminded me, because James was both the King of Scotland and of England. Very important to keep in mind. Mary recognizes that George's beauty gives them leverage, as the king is known for his exacting taste in men. Once James catches a glimpse of George, we're off to the races with all sorts of motherly scheming, catty-gay competitiveness, and royal capriciousness. There's a lot of sex, including the lesbian sort, between Mary and her very hot sex worker turned fixer, Sandy. A lot of tightly laced leather corset outfits. I'm not sure what to call them exactly. They're really hot. And a number of fun appearances from social studies class regulars like Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Bacon, who really amusingly to me gets called Bacon a lot. Just, I don't know, have juvenile humor. While the show obviously stretches the truth to a degree, the basics of this story really did happen. And the version that we see here is a pretty wild ride. Before we jump into the conversation, let's listen to a clip.
That's not how it works. That's not how a single thing fucking works.
Well, it should be.
Are you 5? No. You will go to France, George.
If you make me go, I will kill myself. But this time, I will make sure...
fall in a way that breaks your neck.
So that's why you left me to hang.
I left you because it was staged. You were play acting.
It was real, I promise you. You just want to send me off to France to learn the ways of refinement. And then return to marry some awful rich wife and milk her fat fucking dowry.
It's about more than that.
No, it's not.
I never beat you.
Father has enough times. Why don't you?
Mother, don't hurt him.
I won't. Think of John, eldest, an heir. Who will marry him? How can we build or pass on anything unless we use your gifts?
Gifts?
If I were a man, and I looked like you, I'd rule the fucking planet.
So we're about to get into the conversation now, but I do just want to acknowledge before we do that Starz is running ads for Mary and George on Outward, the podcast that you're listening to now. But I can assure you that we decided to cover it totally apart from that deal, and it has had no bearing on our discussion today. Also, just so listeners know, we're going to be talking about like first 4 or so episodes today, so we're not going to spoil too much. Okay. So, Mary and George, sexy, 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 intrigue, intrigue, intrigue. What are y'all's reactions to this? What feelings did it arouse in you?
I have to share something before you bitches get it, basically, which is that one of the reviews in the British press was headlined Rough Sex. And I loved that because, of course, this is the time, just in case anybody's kind of wondering when people were.
Oh, yes, of course.
So RUFF sex. And there are some beautiful roughs on this show. The costuming is lovely. And yes, there is a lot of sex. There is this beautiful sense that, as someone says, bodies are just bodies. This is before any kind of gay movements, before gay, people are just having sex with whoever they fancy, as long as they are, royal enough to get away with that. And there is this feeling, I actually felt kind of liberated by that I didn't have to worry about the gay politics. I didn't have to worry about how, people's coming out was dealt with. I just had to kind of consider how the sex was presented. And actually, it wasn't presented as much as they gave the impression of. Like, there's a lot of people enjoying sex without actually showing what they're doing. It wasn't even the mystery that you used to see in the L Word. You know, it was just kind of, they enjoyed it. I thought it was sexy. I thought it was inspiring, aspirational. I kind of wanted to flip back to the late 16th century, early 17th century, and just, you know, what would I have done? How would I have made my mark? Whose bed would I have tried to, you know, slip into? So kind of loved it. What about you all?
That's beautiful. I mean, I think I have a similar kind of reaction. You know, I came to this as, you know, again, someone who grew up in Canada, knows about this royal history, but also as a historian of sexuality, which is not as sexy as it sounds. But actually, one of the things I'm really fond of, like, talking about when I'm teaching, right, is like we live in this like identity paradigm of sexuality where it has really important bearing on who you are and what kind of person you are, but that's actually supposed to be private. According, like, ideally it's private, right? It's just like a part of your personality. It's not supposed to, according to liberal egalitarian doctrine, have any bearing on anything else. And that's actually really not how sexuality has functioned in the West for like the last 500 years. And one of the things I'm often fond of telling students, right, is like the history of homosexuality is actually largely about political relationships between men, and women's like absence from that sphere, which doesn't mean they weren't having sex with each other, it just means it had all sorts of different functions. And there is something kind of delightful about seeing that. I think one of the other things that I always like to tell students is like, you know, the idea that the aristocracy is sexually debauched is like a very prominent idea that I think really took off a little after the period that this show covers. But like that's been a centuries old way to indict the ruling class, is to say that they're so decadent, they're so bourgeois. It's usually like the French court, right, is so perverse that they're all just fucking and having orgies all the time. And it's like, well, they kind of often did have sex and orgies and fuck, but those serve interesting political functions. And so there's something to me just sort of actually quite refreshing about that being served up without the teacherly lesson that I just for some reason was giving. Like, it's just like, it's there, right? It's just there to watch. It's in the plot, but it doesn't, it, for the most part, doesn't, you know, turn into like, my God, it must have been so hard for that prince to be bisexual. Like, because no, it wasn't. Court politics are tricky, but like, you know, if we don't believe in aristocracy, but we like good TV, then that's great. But I will say the sex really didn't do it for me. So maybe that's something we could talk about. Mostly just that, like you're saying, June, it really wasn't shown. I was like, okay, he's right behind him. I'm pretty sure I can't see it, but the dick is moving towards the now we're done. And then some of the lesbian sex, I was like, oh, I'm sorry, am I supposed to understand that sex is happening? Like, literally someone is just caressing the outer clothing of another woman. Wait, is this a joke? I couldn't tell if that was a joke. But the way that this is a comedy is kind of interesting. And I think like the one other thing I'm still chewing over is like, especially Julianne Moore's character is very contemporary. She has the affect of like a millennial, right? She's like, I don't care about anything. Life is just a series of decisions you make. The world is fucked. So what if I try and game the system, but I'm so over it? And I was like, that's fascinating to watch happen in like, you know, 1612. I'm not sure what I think about that part yet.
That's lazy girl corporate, like, get
ahead. Yeah. And it's like, you know, it's like part of the fantasy of like, what would you do if you wrote complex, you know, female characters? Although I kind of have a question about whether that really is a complex female character. But anyways, before we go down any rabbit holes, Bryan, I want to know what you think.
I was actually interested. You know, I brought my sort of history of sexuality mind to this too, and found it refreshingly, I don't want to say complex, but like, I guess what you were kind of saying, honest about what that meant then. Like, no one is concerned about really being discovered doing this. It's very, in the court, it's extremely open. And even that the king has these boys, they're all around all the time. There is a Queen Anne of Denmark, I believe, and she's sort of very tolerant of all of this for the most part. Well, it gets tacky sort of later, but it is interesting how the show, does not try to import too much of our modern, you know, narratives about like coming out or whatever like that into the past in a way that, you know, often does happen in things like this. I think it shows how the sex, as you were saying, Jules, is useful for political alliances, for negotiations, for increasing status, of course, in our main character, all those things. So that was actually pretty impressive to me. And you know, it made for a smoother experience watching it, right? It didn't feel clunky in the way that importing stuff can.
Right. We didn't have have to get to the Compton's cafeteria raid
Right,
and be like, oh,
right.
right, saw that
Yeah.
coming.
Turns out aristocrats don't do that when they're busy ruling over poor peasants, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But you brought up Mary, the Mary character, Julianne Moore. I wanted to share something. So we had a really great piece in Slate by our fact versus fiction columnist, Ellen Stein, who wrote a really great piece about, looking at this whole series and comparing it to the actual history. And she has a really wonderful paragraph about Mary Villiers and about how sort of true this is, right? So I'm just going to read that because it sort of was fascinating to me. The ambition, superb strategic thinking, and ruthlessness demonstrated by the central figure Mary Villiers might seem anachronistic, to your point, Jules, but she really was that much of a girl boss, climbing from relative obscurity via advantageous marriages, the usual, indeed the only way for a woman to better her social position in 17th century England, to become a countess and one of the most powerful women in the country. So along the way, her rise might have included pimping out her son to the king, kidnapping her future daughter-in-law to force her into an unwanted marriage, and committing another son to an asylum. But hey, the path to power is never easy. Mary did in fact do all of these things, as shown in the series, but there is scant evidence as for the murders the show also attributes to her. I thought that was fascinating.
I mean, I do believe the orgies would have happened because, I mean, they didn't even have television. They didn't have
It's
streaming,
boring.
So, like, what else were you going to do back then?
They had a lot of sofas and day beds. Like, the furniture is crying out for sex. I mean, it's just like sex position furniture. Yeah.
Right. I watched this show and felt, it's very sexy. It's full of sex. It's full of, rutting and freedom and, using your body and owning your body and all that stuff, which all the things that seem very positive to me. But yeah, when you after, it was kind of one of those things that when you sort of paused and said, well, you're quite good, I think, at giving the impression of what's going on. There's a sort of spitting in the hand, grabbing the nether regions, but there's no, there's not showing anything that actually might cause some issues in some households or maybe on some channels or whatever. There isn't actually anything shown that would cause trouble. And there's also very little affection. This is a plot point, but we learn that James had a true love, his first love with his true love. And that is not even sort of shown in flashback. So the happy love, which surely was also a sexual love, isn't even shown. That's completely described for whatever reason. And so there is this feeling that maybe it's great art, that we kind of have a sense that people are enjoying their bodies, but we're not kind of forced to confront, which sometimes leads people to say, I didn't like the way they had sex. It seems like they're having fun, and maybe that's the question. Thing.
Are they having fun? Like, I agree. I think the show is very atmospheric. The show is very demonstrative about sex, right? Again, like you were saying, it's wanting to say, look, these people could just have sex. I actually think that is very modern. It's very contemporary. I do think the kind of like own your body, bodies are just bodies. That's the 21st century talking. I really do not believe the early modern period is very interesting in part because it's actually very hard for us to conceptualize even with whatever written records we have and evidence, what the fuck people thought about the really interesting things they used to do in general. I don't just mean sex. But I think what doesn't satisfy me is this, right? Personally, I did not detect chemistry in any of the sex. And that's fine because the sex serves a lot of plot points. I like diegetic sex. Right. I like that, right? That sex is not this thing that happens outside of the bounds of regular life where you go into some sort of weird trance state. Like it's like a Skinamax show from 2003. But I just needed I don't know if it's an acting issue because I just noticed it happening constantly, right? It's not just like the actors didn't have chemistry. I feel like I have to guess that was not the show's intent, right? And so, but then it leaves me sort of literally unsatisfied because I think sex should be hot. Call me old-fashioned, but I like to be titillated.
All right, we're going to pause this wonderful discussion right here for just a second to have a quick break.
I am not a scholar of the history of sexuality, but something that I associate with historic man-on-man sex is the notion of older men teaching younger men and taking them under their wings and revealing, yes, the pleasures of the flesh, but also improving their status in life and so on.
Those dynamics are interesting. I'm glad you picked up on that, June, because the king had this first love that isn't on screen, but he talks about it. You know, he was a younger man. This other older guy sort of took him under his wing and taught him a lot of things. And it's interesting to hear that compared to the relationship we see between the king and George and the other men, which is really something more like codependent. The king himself as a character here is extremely, I don't know, like kind of unstable and needy, but he's not that like strong kind of daddy figure that you were describing, June, right? And that's, I actually kind of enjoyed that. Like it made for an interesting viewing experience to not have the king be a king, really. He's kind of this weakling, like to some degree. I don't say that negatively, but that's just, he is. Also, I saw a headline somewhere that picked up on the fact that like the king is a bottom, right? Like,
yeah. The whole fiction of monarchy is that the king is half divine.
Right.
An actual partially godlike on this earth who rules over everyone, has these obscene political and economic powers for a reason, right? And of course, the commoners don't really ever know because they don't meet the king. But for the court, like this is a real live question. And, you know, early on in the series, our scheming family is like going to meet His Majesty basically for the first time. And it's like very exciting. What's going to happen, right? And then, of course, it's fascinating that James is just sort of like some guy, you know, in a crew where there are some pretty charismatic gays, right? He's just sort of like, oh yeah, like I get that. That's kind of smart. And the whole point of having sex with the king is like, if you believe in the divine right of monarchy, sex with a king should be like mind blowing, right? It should be at another level. And the king obviously should be fucking you. And so none of that happens. Like, that's great. That's a fascinating premise. I just get this sort of sense that like no one really, like a genuine question, like, what do you do with that? Where do you go from there? Right? Like, how do you make that sort of interesting? And also like, what would that do to the actual sex, right? I think it's so telling now that we're talking about it that we can't really see that because I think it's actually genuinely hard to think about, right? And so I think because I think the show is too smart to say sex is the great equalizer, right? I don't think that's a story we want to get from rich aristocrats, right? Sex is not the great equalizer. They're only able to do all of this because like they have all this power and they're playing these weird games. But even like Mary, right? Like Julianne Moore's character, so self-possessed, so powerful. She's basically acting like a man in a period where that's very difficult, except for her relative wealth in the society. But, right, then it's all the more interesting that she might go to like a sex worker and be like, I want to have sex with a woman, but this is new to me. And, you know, I think that character says like, when you're in my bedchamber, who's in charge? And Mary replies, you are. That's great. What a great statement, right? Why is this powerful woman giving up her sovereignty in the bedroom? But it just hasn't paid off for me yet, right? Like, I love that. I love these premises. I'm really, really interested in exploring them. I just think it's really making clear to me how hard it is for us to conceptualize that sex might not really be clarifying of who we really are, right? It's like these people's public personae don't correspond to their private sexual acts, and yet there is a relationship between them. And I think that's a great thought problem to chew on. And maybe I just think it would be more exciting to chew on it by being, again, titillated by what I'm watching. And it's totally okay that the show doesn't answer that question. Like, but I just think that's probably why it's really worth watching.
Well, be careful. King James will chew on you if you're not too careful.
Ooh, well, he's welcome to try.
That's right.
I think we all agree that everyone should check it out, right? Like it's fun.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, it's really fun. Lots of interesting questions in it, but also just it's a good soapy time. It's called Mary and George, and it is rolling out weekly on the Starz network.
Well, that is about all the time we have for this episode. But before we let you go, we do have your updates to the gay agenda. So goodness gracious me, we've got extra gay agenda this month, thanks to June. Bryan, do you want to kick us off? What have you got for us?
Sure. I have another podcast that I would like to recommend that I've discovered recently.
Speaking of infidelity, you don't only listen to Outward?
I know, I'm spending time with it. I'm stepping out with another podcast. I've discovered it recently. I've really fallen in love with it. It's called I've Had It. I think it's been around for about maybe a little over a year now. It is not queer per se, but I'm including putting it here because it's very heavily influenced by the gays. They're very active in shaping the show. And the producer of the show who's on it sometimes is a avowed lesbian. The show is hosted by these two, I think, middle-aged women who live in Oklahoma called Jennifer Welch and Angie Pumps Sullivan. And the whole premise of the show is just petty grievances. They just rant about what they've had it with. So it's like, what have you had it with this week? Things like when you get bread at a restaurant and they bring you cold butter that you think is bread on it. Like a good 5-minute, 10-minute dissection of that, right? They're hilarious. They're comedians, right? So it's like a funny podcast. I've had it podcast, really fun. Highly recommend y'all go check that out. June, what do you have?
Well, speaking of late discoveries, I know it's been around for a year, but I only found it a few months ago. I'm speaking, of course, about the queerest puzzle in the New York Times Gamesiverse, that is Connections. To me, it is super, super queer. Like, so if anyone hasn't tried it, you get 16 words and you have to make 4 sets of 4. It's actually
like categorizing,
yes.
by like a connection. Yeah.
Connection. Finding connection.
With this.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's actually, there's an unacknowledged debt to the BBC TV game show Only Connect. But anyway, to me, it's super gay because it reminds me of like, a gay man or, maybe any kind of queer. The great history and skill of matching up people for, a fantastic dinner party conversations. You have to be able to make imaginative leaps the way that I used to have to when I was a kid reading the horoscope in the newspaper, and they'd be talking about meeting somebody of the opposite sex. And I'd be like, no, that's not what's going on. So it's like, it feels it's in a very similar thing. And that most of all, like when you finished, you get a kind of 4-layer cake, which is a mini, like 4 out of 7 rainbow, if you get it right.
It is.
So super gay, super fun Connections.
June, I feel very validated by this gay agenda item because one of my partners, Tristan, plays all of the Times games every day, and he will let me come and help with the Connections. It's the only one I'm good at and the only one I like, and I think that must be because I'm gay. Yeah. Kenzie 7 or whatever. Yeah. That's it. Because I love
Seven's window.
I love making the connection, the free association. Exactly. That is very gay. Yeah,
super gay, super gay. What have you got for us, Ms. Jewel?
Well, I guess our theme is like on a slight tape delay. We've got recommendations. So, because it didn't just come out, but the reason that I wanted to make it a gay agenda item is contemporary, which is that the Triangle Publishing Awards, which is one of the many actually LGBT literary and book awards out there, which I just think is lovely. We read a lot, so we give a lot of awards away. But one of the premier awards, a bunch were handed out, and the Leslie Feinberg Award for Trans and Gender Variant Literature was given to a fabulous author, a fabulous book, Emily Jo's book, Girlfriends, which is a collection of short stories that was put out by one of the best presses out there. I'm saying this very biasly because I love the editors, but by Little Puss Press, which is a fabulous independent publisher putting out great trans titles and queer titles. But Emily Jo is like definitely one of these people who is like really distilling in a brilliant, hilarious, but genuinely formally interesting kind of way the Gen Z trans girl, world. I mean, like she's sort of is coming at it from New York, but really it's just like a fabulous collection debut book, and I'm so happy to see that it got the award. And it's just another great reminder for everyone to run out and snag a copy of Girlfriends and treat yourself to some irreverent, hilarious humor, whether you're Gen Z or trans or not. I think there's just a lot in there that will kind of click into place for you, but also make you kind of laugh uncontrollably while that's happening, which I just think is delightful. So highly recommend Girlfriends by Emily Jo. And just, side gay agenda, always pay attention to what Little Puss is putting out there. I mean, it's right there in the name. How could you ignore?
I pulled this up because I want to read it. And I love that the author is described as a trans Mary McCarthy.
So, I mean, hello. Hello. What we've been waiting for.
I love it. Yeah. Sold. Ordered.
Well, sadly, I think that's about all the time we have for this episode. But before we go, just a reminder, we're always soliciting your feedback and your topic ideas, or whatever else you'd like to drop us a line about. You can hit us up at outwardpodcast@slate.com, or slide into our Facebook/X at Slate Outward. And like we said, like Bryan said earlier, we're stockpiling your advice questions for future episodes, so keep them coming. They're going somewhere. Importantly, they're being tucked in and watched over with love and care. And just a reminder, if you want to join Slate Plus, you'll get ad-free podcasts, extra segments on shows like Working, and you will never hit a paywall on the Slate site. If that's of interest, you can head over to slate.com/outward plus. Our show was produced by the noble and aristocratic Palace Shaw, but in this case, terms that are deserved. And if you like Outward, please subscribe in your podcast app. Tell your friends about it and rate and review the show so other people can find it. In the meantime, bye, Bryan, and bye, June. So good to see you.
I know, June. June's going to be back soon. Don't worry. We'll have her again.
In the meantime, maybe stay gay.
Let's stay gay, y'all.
Stay gay.
The Coca-Cola Company, Keurig Dr. Pepper, and PepsiCo are bringing consumers more choices with less sugar than ever before. From sparkling, flavored, and bottled waters to zero-sugar sports drinks, teas, and sodas, consumers are taking advantage of these choices. In fact, nearly 60% of beverages sold contain zero sugar. To learn more, visit balanceus.org.